IVM.
Before we move on with this episode of The Seen and the Unseen, do check out another awesome podcast from IVM Podcast, Cyrus Says, hosted by my old buddy Cyrus Brocha. India has two national obsessions, cricket and popular cinema. But there comes a time every year when it seems like there's a third obsession, the budget. There used to be a time when only people who cared about economics cared about the budget. Wonks would write opinion pieces for other wonks. But that has changed, as the budget has become a part of popular culture. These days, the day before it's out, your city supplements will have stories where 40 minor film stars and celebrities are asked what they would like from the budget, as if they understand any of the nuances. Ask your average celeb, if there is such a thing as an average celeb, what he thinks of the fiscal deficit. And he'll probably say, यार मैं एक बार ना 3 हफ्तों के लिए जिम नहीं गया, मेरा fiscal deficit हो गया. But that jokes apart, it seems to me that the budget should both matter and not matter to every citizen of this country. On the one hand, it should not matter too much because it betrays a central planning mindset. Our economy basically runs on its own, like all economies, in spite of the state. Although the state can and does do great damage to it, the state's only legit role is to be an enabler, to maintain the rule of law and to make sure it doesn't use its monopoly on violence to place obstacles to free enterprise. Of course, in practice, in India, the rule of law is basically absent, and obstacles are ever present all around us. That said, even in a perfect world, the budget would be something that every citizen of a democracy should care deeply about. After all, it's an account of what the state is doing with our money. We need to keep it accountable at all times. Eternal vigilance. And the budget is one tool that increases transparency and hopefully accountability. It might be a damn boring document, but we all need to pay attention to the budget.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest for today is India's most popular economics writer, Vivek Kaul, a frequent guest on the show and a good friend of mine. Vivek follows a budget like some people follow Game of Thrones. You could say he's a budget fanboy. He loves diving into the world of numbers, but unlike others of such strange inclinations, he actually does something quite useful after absorbing these numbers. He explains it to others in a way that everyone can understand. This is a rare public service, and I'm sure you're very moved already at the sacrifice this involves. Vivek takes one for the team. But before I begin my conversation with him, let's take a quick commercial break. This episode of The Seen and the Unseen is brought to you by Storytel. Storytel is an audiobook platform which you can listen to on your Android or iOS app. They have thousands of audiobooks that you can listen to on your mobile, including hundreds in local languages like Hindi and Marathi. An unlimited monthly subscription costs only Rs 299 per month. And you can also get a 30-day free trial if you hop on over to storytel.com/IVM. I actually use Storytel myself regularly, so as long as they sponsor the show, I'm going to recommend one book a week that I love. The book I want to recommend today is by one of India's most popular and loved writers, Ruskin Bond. It's called Friends in Wild Places, Birds, Beasts and Other Companions. And remember, you get a 30-day free trial only at storytel.com/IVM. Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, Vivek.
Hi, Amit.
So the day the budget came out, and I'm sure the the ratings of Mirror Now went up massively because you were all day on Mirror Now. What's kind of the experience like being like a TV pundit then?
I mean, if I were to be very honest, I don't like being on TV. And this for the simple reason because most of the times, nuance goes out of the window, and you have to. And I mean, even if nuance goes out of the window, that I'm still fine with. But sometimes you have to answer questions which you have no clue of. Because, once the anchor has put a question across to you, you can't say, I don't know, on live TV. So you have to either answer that question or, you have to do what we all used to do, when we used to write exams in school. Wherein, no, not wing it, wherein even if, the question can be anything, you write what you know. so that you fill up that space. So which is typically, if you watch TV carefully and especially when they talk about economics, it happens quite a lot because because the anchor is trying to dumb it down to a level where everyone and anyone understands what is happening. But sometimes the questions asked are such that it's simply not possible to sort of get it down to that level. Yeah.
I remember way back in the last decade when I was an active blogger, I used to get called to be a talking head on all of these TV shows. So I've been on We the People, I've been on Arnab show before Arnab became Arnab. And the interesting strategy there is that you basically get time to say one or two sentences. You go there, what all the regular guests use is you go there prepared with your one or two lines.
And then which is what happens typically. So you basically, have, let's say, when you go there, you have 4 to 5 points listed out. And then you, say those points when your opportunity comes. The problem comes when they expect you to answer something you have no clue of. So like one day what happened was I was there for a discussion on some topic, dealing with, I think, economics. And Mamata Banerjee suddenly started having a press conference. Okay. Now, what happens is typically that, the way an anchor works is he or she bounces off, questions or ideas with someone who is present with him or her in the studio. So I happened to be the only one in the studio with the anchor at that point of time. So I was expected to have a view on West Bengal as well. And the politics of West Bengal. So those situations can be, politics is easy, we all have an opinion, but it's not something that, I'm really comfortable with. So
no, and the interesting thing is that if you get pushed into a situation where you have to wing it and give an opinion, then because you've given the opinion, you start rationalizing the opinion and eventually actually believing it.
Yeah, which is what happened, when I was a part of the election coverage on TV. And that happened, because initially I had said a few things and then I needed evidence to back that up. And then I started rationalizing it and then I started believing it.
This is the birth of political ideology right here.
So that TV does that to you. And the funny thing is I could see it happening. It wasn't like I didn't realize what was happening.
So like the homunculus, the Vivek Kaul inside Vivek Kaul is looking down at Vivek Kaul doing all these things and saying,
still
"Kya
can't."
kar raha hai bhai?"
Aur phir bhi kuch nahi.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're basically going to discuss the budget, and we are going to discuss the state of the economy as it is. And we went on Twitter and Facebook and asked people to give in questions, and I think there are 143 questions. We were going to pick 5.
We didn't count.
Yeah, but it felt like 143, and no doubt as we are recording this, the number
is
will go
143 a prime number? Yeah.
Moment of silence. Don't edit the silence out. I want all my listeners to know my ignorance on this question. Let's just be honest here. So we'll get to those questions at the end of this episode, but I have to tell you that I also received 3 questions by postcard. So I'm going to take you through those questions now. No, really, from postcard, from a long way away. So the first of those questions, one of them is for me, but 2 are for you. So I'll space them out through the episode. The first question, Dear Vivek, I must tell you how much I admire your deep insights on economics and your voice. I love listening to your voice. Whenever there is too much stress at work, I put on my headphones and play one of your old episodes with Amit, and I immediately feel at ease. I really wish you were here with me now. It is so hard to run a ministry on my own. This letter is from Nirmala S. in Delhi. So, secret.
We are all going to go to Arthur Road soon.
What is Arthur Road?
There's a jail there. A big one.
Okay, I mean, I'll come and visit whichever one of my friends is.
No, I mean, you will also go because I haven't done anything. I just happened to be here.
What do you mean I just happened to be here? Did you see what happened to Hardik Pandya and KL Rahul? What did KL Rahul say that was wrong?
He was just there.
He just happened to be there. So watch out, Vivek. So let's getting back to an equally serious issue of the budget. In general, you've been covering economics, I think, for almost 15 years now as a writer on the subject. Did you follow the budget before that? When did you first kind of get interested in the budget? And
so the first budget I actually sort of was an active part of, was the budget in 2006. And I happened to be working for a newspaper called DNA back then. And, this was an era in which newspapers had started taking, a lot of interest in the budget. And the idea was to sort of obviously dump it down and make everyone interested. And so there was a lot of pre-packaged stuff that went into the newspaper. And I think that was the first budget that I really, I was well and truly a part of. But before that, I did write on the budget without really being a part of, any media house or something. Yeah.
And how much does the budget really matter? Because, okay, the government says that these are the revenues that are going to come in. This is what we are going to do with it, which is basically, that's a summary of what it is. कि यहाँ से पैसा आएगा, हम इसके साथ ये करेंगे. But they don't actually end up necessarily getting those revenues which they forecast, nor doing the things that they promise to do.
Yes, which is true. And I think, it's like any budgeting exercise. When you start, you need a certain direction, right? Now, whether that, whether the way you've budgeted or whether the whatever you want to achieve during the course of the year happens or not is another thing altogether. But, everything needs a starting point. And as far as, starting points go, the budget is, it is important. Having said that, it's not the only thing. I mean, if you like, and I'll give you a very, very simple example. Like, in the last year's budget, the government set a certain target which they wanted to achieve on the goods and services tax front. So basically, goods and services tax is collected by the central government and then it's divided between the central government and the state governments. Okay. So the central government hoped to earn around 6.04 lakh crore through the central GST. By the by the time 6-7 months had gone down, it was very clear that they would not be able to earn that kind of money. Okay. Now what they did was that when the next budget was presented, which was in February, which was an interim budget this time, they revised the number lower to around 5.04 lakh crore. So it was 100,000 crore lower. But even that lower number was not achievable. And a lot of people, including me, wrote that at that point of time. And they finally ended up achieving rupees 4.58 lakh crore. Okay. Now, the point is that, you had a certain target when you sort of came up with the budget. You had an opportunity to revise it. You did revise it, but you did not revise it as much as you should have. So, obviously when you start, there is a certain target in mind, but as you go along, if that target is not achieved, you also have an opportunity to revise it. Now, the fact that they chose not to revise it, or not to revise it as much as they should have, is another thing. But, so when you start, you need to know as to, as long as, if you don't know where your money is going to come from, how will you decide how much can you spend?
So here's a broader question. How much is economics nowadays hostage to politics? For example, the thing is that to get a sense of what's happening in the economy, we need good data. Now, clearly that good data is not there. The data is essentially whatever data is put out by the government is in question all the time. In fact, last week I recorded a great episode on the GDP with the economist Rajeshwari Sengupta, which was such a great episode. I wanted to release it immediately, but your fans were clamoring for this episode, so we delayed it by a week. But one of the points that she made there was that the whole process is completely opaque now, and it just becomes a matter of faith which number you choose to accept. And obviously there are smell tests of the sort that even you have done, which can tell you whether, it smells right or not. But then the thing is, when all the sources of data are so sort of in question, and also where the government is doing various kinds of jugaad to show itself in a good light, jugaad with the numbers. So that's not just in terms of how you define or measure the GDP, which is an opaque system, and that episode is out next week. But even, for example, how a friend of ours pointed out that, how expenditure by the government of last year has been managed, quote unquote, managed by not releasing funds to the Food Corporation of India. And FCI for the last 3 years has been borrowing from the National Small Savings Fund so that the government can, put a number in a particular light. But this is a sort of a jugaad for the sake of optics.
So, basically, you asked 3-4 questions, so I'll try answering them one by one. See, as far as data is concerned, I think the quality of data, or more than the quality, even the quantity and the availability of data now in 2019 is much better than it was in 2004, 2003. The second thing is that in 2003, 2004, because the internet was what it was, at least in India, it was in a very rudimentary stage. The data was not as easily available as it is now. I mean, back then, unless you had physical copies of documents and all, it was a little difficult to dig out data. So to that extent, the availability is a lot better now than it used to be back then. We also have a lot more data than we used to have back then. As far as the quality of data is concerned, I think, we are missing a point here. I don't think there is a doubt about all government data. Yes, there is doubt about a few data points here and there. And, the biggest of them being the gross domestic product, which is basically a measure of the economic size of a country, in this case, India. So the GDP numbers are in doubt. Fiscal deficit is a tricky thing. And I mean, since you've raised the Food Corporation example, so I'll sort of explain it in detail. Now, basically, Food Corporation of India, what does it do? Food Corporation of India buys rice and wheat, primarily, directly from the farmers at a certain price. Now, this price is referred to as a minimum support price and is set every year by the government. So the rice is bought, and the wheat is bought, and then this rice and wheat is sold through the public distribution system at a very low price. Now, public distribution system we've all commonly seen the ration shops, all across the country. So, in fact, there used to be a ghazal by Jagjit Singh, "Ab main ration ki kataron mein nazar aata hoon." So, अपने बच्चों से बिछड़ने की सजा पाता हूँ.
Could be the anthem of the Food Corporation of India.
So basically, let's say I'm just giving you, I don't remember exact numbers, but let's say they sort of buy rice at 15, 16 rupees per kg. They sell it at 2, 3 rupees per kg. So the government needs to make good of this difference.
Subsidy, basically.
This is the subsidy. So the government makes good of this under recovery through food subsidies allocated in the budget.
Correct.
The problem is that the amount allocated towards the food subsidies are never really enough to sort of compensate Food Corporation of India. Or what happens is, what happened last year was that the revenues that the government expected to earn did not really come in. So the amount allocated towards food subsidy was around 1.7 lakh crore. And the final number which went towards food subsidy was around 1.01 lakh crore or something like that.
So they're borrowing the rest.
No. So basically what is happening is that to that extent, FCI wasn't paid around, let's say, 70,000 crore. Okay. Now, so there are two things here. One is that the government works on cash accounting. Not like companies work on accrual, government works on cash. Now, what does this mean? This basically means that it doesn't matter in case of the government whether an expenditure is due or not. Whether an expenditure is due. Unless it has been paid for, unless money has left the accounts of the government, that is not counted as expenditure. Okay. So even though you need to pay, let's say, 70,000 crore more to Food Corporation of India, the fact that you haven't, it basically means that expenditure has not been incurred.
And also what that then means is that your fiscal deficit number looks much better than it would have.
Which is what I'm saying. So because the government expenditure hasn't happened, so your fiscal deficit number ends up looking much better. Now, on the flip side, FCI needs to go out and borrow that money because it needs to continue to be in operation. It's a going concern, right? Now, why does anyone lend to FCI? They lend to FCI because FCI is an entity of the government of India and governments typically do not default. Okay. So even though that lending ends up showing on the books of the Food Corporation of India, it is basically money that is being lent to the government of India. Now, over the years, what has happened is, I did some rough calculation, some time back. I think the total amount of money that is due to FCI as of March 31st, 2019 comes to around 1,60,000 crore. So this is not happened over a period of 1 year. It has been happening for at least the last 8-9 years. I think it started under P. Chidambaram when he was the finance minister. And because of that number is ballooned. Now it's ballooned to a level where it's become uncontrollable. Now, other than what is also happening is that FCI, other than borrowing from the market, it is borrowing from something called as the National Small Savings Fund. Now, the money that we all put in the Public Provident Fund and all the different investment schemes run by the Post Office goes into the NSSF, National Small Savings Fund. So FCI is now borrowing from that fund as well. So which is not
there's one government entity borrowing from another government entity because the government hasn't paid it the money to make its fiscal deficit figures look good, and the taxpayers are on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, of course. So the other interesting thing that also is happening, and it's been happening for a long time, is one government company buying another government company, and paying the government for it,
and calling it privatization.
And not privatization, calling it disinvestment. They don't call it. They call it strategic disinvestment. So last year you had ONGC buying HPCL for some 37,000 crore. So that money went from the coffers of ONGC and it went to the government, and ONGC now owns HPCL. In order to execute this deal, ONGC had to borrow 18,000 crores. Now, obviously, ONGC is borrowing here. So, but this borrowing should actually be on the books of the government, not on the books of ONGC. So, this is another way the government sort of works towards bringing down its fiscal deficit. So, I think there's another deal which happened, I think this year.
So basically, ONGC will borrow, they'll pay the government, and the government will present it as revenues, and it will look good in the fiscal.
So it's like, it's basically a long time, if I don't know if this is it's a good example, when, the Enron fraud in the US, at the heart of it, what was happening was, Enron was making subsidiaries. The subsidiaries were borrowing money, and that borrowed money ended up through various shenanigans, ended up as revenue on the books of Enron. So this is a similar operation where ONGC borrows money and buys HPCL, gives that money to the government. So the money that ONGC has borrowed ends up as revenue on the books of the government. And that's how.
Except in the corporate world, when Enron does it, you call it fraud, but here it is statecraft and financial management.
We can't call it fraud, but it's not.
Yeah, it's basically jugaad meant to fool
it's not, it doesn't. So see, basically what happens here is, and this is an exercise which can go on for eternity, right? Now ONGC bought HPCL, then someone else can buy ONGC, then someone else can buy that.
Yeah, and ultimately it's taxpayers' money and our children suffer, though none of us have children, so.
Which is why we don't.
Well, we are actually the only people who give a shit about this. But
at least none that we know of.
Speak for yourself. Right. So now let's actually it's a good time to come to another letter, which I received by postcard, which is again a letter for you. So now the context for this letter is that for the newspaper Mint, you'd done this lovely full-page thing where you created a snakes and ladders board and explained the budget through the snakes and the ladders.
It was not the budget. It was actually the 5 trillion.
The 5 trillion kaise banenge and all that. Yeah, cool. Which I will ask you more questions about later. Or maybe why not right after this. And so the letter regards, right? Dear Vivek, after the budget came out, I noted that you did a snakes and ladder feature for a local newspaper. It was very creative and I must commend you. However, I would like to let you know that I own all the snakes and ladders in this country. So kindly be careful the next time you try a stunt like this. This letter is from Amit S. in Delhi.
Oh, Baba.
So I won't ask you to respond to this because it's not a question, it's fan mail. So it doesn't fit into the AMA
I guess.
sort of thing. But no, one of the things that, and I of course retweeted your tweet on that snakes and ladder thing. And one of the delightful things about it was that you sort of made something which was very complex, very explicable and fun. And you did the same thing in a column you wrote about the budget where you brought in Basanti, Viru, Gabbar and Jay. Kindly explain the connection of Sholay to the budget.
So when I had to sort of write this piece, I had sort of figured out what I wanted to write. But I needed an opening which sort of curated some, reader interest and also made me sort of a little more excited about writing the piece. So the basic idea was to sort of, whenever I'm in doubt, I sort of go back to 70s, 80s Hindi cinema. So the basic idea was that, you have the hero and the heroine's family, which has been captured by the villain. And, they are at his den. And then after some point, you have this, you have a hero breaking in through a wall on a motorcycle, when he comes to rescue all of them. So this was the basic idea. This was what I originally wanted to write. And then it sort of occurred to me that, why sort of use a general example when you can use a specific one. So the specific example was Sholay, where Basanti and Viru are at Gabbar's den. And Basanti is essentially being told very clearly by a khani chewing Gabbar that, as long as you dance, your boyfriend shall live. And Viru cannot do anything because his hands are tied, right? So when you're watching this as an audience, you obviously are a little worried, right? Ye kya ho raha hai? But at the back of, because you have seen as many Hindi films as you have, I mean, you know that someone will come to the rescue. And in this case, you know that Viru's friend, Jay, who's not there, will come and sort of rescue them. So this was the basic idea of what I wanted to write. Now, obviously, what was the connection with the economy and with the budget? And now, so if you look at the budget, there is obviously the revenue side with what the government hopes to earn, and the expenditure side on what it wants to spend its money on. If you look at the revenue side, the 5 biggest taxes, this time around, that the government earns money through are basically corporation tax, which is income tax paid by companies. Then there is income tax, which you and I pay. Then there is GST, goods and services tax, which we pay on a whole host of things we consume. I mean, starting from the food that we eat at restaurants, so on and so forth. Then there is union excise duty, and then there is customs duty. Okay. Now, these are the 5 main taxes. If you look at the targets for this financial year, the government hopes to earn 20% more than what they had earned during the last financial year. Okay. This is the overall taxes. If you adjust the overall taxes for what the central government shares with the state governments, what remains, are referred to as revenue receipts. And those revenue receipts are expected to grow 25% this year. Now, 20% growth and 25% growth in government revenues is, if I wouldn't call it impossible, is very, very difficult. Okay. Now, why do I say that? You have an economy which the government expects to grow by around 12%. This is in nominal terms without adjusting for inflation. Now, when the economy is growing by 12%, expecting taxes to grow by 20 or 25% is a calculation which does not work. Okay. But, again, so how does the government balance this out? Okay. They balance this out by expecting the Reserve Bank of India to give them a huge dividend. Okay. Now, how is all this sort of linked with, Gabbar, Basanti and Sholay and whatnot? So obviously, in this situation, you have Basanti and you have Viru, right? So they are basically like the economy and the government. Okay. And, or you can even call them the budget, whatever. Now, they need to be rescued. And who will rescue them? The RBI will rescue them. So the RBI becomes Jai, right? So you have Jai, Viru, and you have Gabbar, and you have Basanti. Okay. Now, how will the RBI rescue the government? The RBI, so basically, the RBI makes a profit every year from its operations. How does RBI make a profit? Now, what is the liability of the RBI? The liability of the RBI is the paper money that it prints and puts out into the market. The assets are the international bonds, or the bonds that it owns. Now, what happens is that the RBI earns interest on its assets, but it does not pay any interest on its liabilities. So it ends up making a humongous amount of profit every year. So what happens is a significant share of this profit is shared with the government as a dividend every year. And whatever remains goes into the capital of the RBI. Okay. And so this has been happening for many years, and RBI has ended up accumulating a certain amount of capital. Now, this is a fairly technical issue, and even my understanding of this doesn't go, beyond the fact that the RBI has ended up accumulating a lot of capital. So, a few years back, Arvind Subramaniam, who happened to be the chief economic advisor of the Ministry of Finance, wrote in the economic survey that a significant portion of this accumulated capital that the RBI has can be shared with the government of India. Since then, there has been a lot of back and forth. Anybody and everybody who has worked for the RBI does not like the idea of handing over this money to the government, because what they are saying is that all this capital on our books essentially gives us a rock solid balance sheet, and it helps us any point of time where there is any international financial crisis which can spread to India. The government, on the other hand, wants this money, and it's desperate for money this time around. So there is a committee which was set up under former RBI Governor Bimal Jalan, which has not arrived at a decision as yet, and I think the news going around is that they are likely to sort of submit a report sometime this month. And what they are essentially saying is that this capital should be shared with the government over a period of time. And that sort of makes a lot of sense. The government wants it all at once because they know that, one is that the tax targets are highly optimistic, and there is no way they're going to go around, earning that kind of money. So this time around, I think the total amount of money that the government expects as an RBI dividend is around 90,000 crore. So last year, the RBI had given them a dividend of 40,000 crore, and then it had given an interim dividend of 28,000 crore. So this 90,000 crore is what has been budgeted for. So in case the revenues don't come through, which is a given. Revenues don't jump by 25% year on year. So if that happens, then they'll need more money from the RBI.
So let me kind of summarize my understanding, because this also speaks, understanding of this RBI issue, because this also speaks to a larger conflict that's been brewing over the years, which a lot of people have heard about but may not understand so well. Basically, it's understood that in a democracy, you need certain institutions which have a certain amount of autonomy from the government. Typically, the central bank, in our case, the RBI, is supposed to be one of those institutions. The whole idea of having this cash buffer independent from the government and in the RBI's hand is, like you said, in case there are financial emergencies or whatever, then the RBI can use it responsibly. And it's important for the financial system that the RBI retains its accountability and retains its independence over decisions like these. Now, what has happened over the last few years is that there has been pushback from the government, which has been struggling with its own fiscal imperatives to say, give us the money. And everyone from the RBI, and this was, one of the core issues over which, Rajan fought, Urjit Patel fought, Vidal Acharya fought, where they were saying that no, this might be good for the government, it's not good for the country, because we need to keep that money in reserve for the RBI. And eventually what has happened is all those guys are gone, and Shaktikanta Das, who was a bureaucrat, who enthusiastically carried out and defended demonetization, and who will basically do the government's bidding, is now the governor of the RBI. So the government actually has its own man running the RBI, which is not a desirable state
the bureaucrat part is, if you look at some of the best RBI governors, everyone from Bimal Jalan to Dr. Y.V. Reddy, who were very, very highly respected, they were also all bureaucrats.
Sure, but
they were financial
This gentleman has a slightly spotty record because of his role during demonetization.
So what I'm trying to say is that it's not just because someone is a bureaucrat, he or she cannot make for a good RBI governor. But yes, your point's well taken. So, okay. So the other thing is, what happens is, so this is again, this is some, a lot of economics is simple, but this is not. This is quite convoluted.
Even the philosophical question at the heart of this, that should the RBI actually keep this money and not make it available to the government? If so, how much should they give? Is, I think, too deeply complex for you or I to have.
Yeah, no, which is true, but there are simple points that one can make. So, let's say the RBI gives the government a humongous dividend this year. What happens next year? Where is the government going to get money from? Because government expenditure never really comes down, it only goes up. So where is that money going to come from next year? After you've taken money from the RBI. The second thing is, so, how will the RBI hand this money to the government? It has to print this money and hand it over to the government. Okay. Now, obviously, the simple explanation here is that, when the RBI prints money and hands it over to the government, the money supply will go up and then inflation will happen. Now, this is not always true, because what the RBI can also do at the same time is that, while it can hand over printed money to the government, it can also suck money out of the market. The same amount of money can be sucked out of the market by selling bonds, right? So, so that is, there is this point to it as well. But largely, the point here is that, what will the government do in the years to come? Because, if it has to take such a huge amount of money from the Reserve Bank to keep itself going, then there is a basic problem with our fiscal maths. Our expenditures, our revenues don't justify our expenditures.
And like you pointed out in your excellent piece, which will be linked from the show notes, it's important to remember that in Sholay, Jay did come to the rescue, but he died.
So which is the last point here that... even though we didn't want him to die, but yeah, he did die. So.
And the irony that Basanti was played by a now BJP MP, which is...
No, and Viru was also a former BJP MP. So.
There you go. So
and Jay is a former Congress MP. So
this has confused the shit out of me.
I guess.
But basically,
Amitabh Bachchan was a Congress MP from Allahabad, very, very
famous. Yeah, but now
I guess only Gabbar probably never fought elections. So.
Gabbar was the good guy.
And even Jayaprada, Jaya Bhadri, what was her role? What was she called in the movie? She's also a member of parliament. So
there you go.
Everyone who acted in Sholay, ended up in parliament at some point of time. Oh, this is something I never realized.
What is the lesson that we can draw from this, Vivek?
That we should have worked in...
Yeah, you have only written about Sholay and you're nowhere near parliament. Though, of course, if these postcards are true, they do want you to help them run ministries. But what's happening here is, in the government's thirst for revenue, it is not only, looking to the RBI to help in the way that you just described, but is also increasing taxes. Like Andy Mukherjee wrote a piece on Bloomberg, which has a great headline, the headline is, if it moves, tax it. Yeah. That's desperate India. And in fact, I'll quote from
Andy can do that. He lives in Singapore. So.
You can't do that. Yeah. And I'll quote from that piece and ask for your comment on it, where what he basically says is, quote, instead of confronting the sober reality, revamping a flawed GST and taking steps to pull the economy out of a synchronized slowdown in consumption and private investment, bureaucrats are trying to make up the revenue shortfall by taxing everything that moves. Stop quote. Is this short-sighted?
Yeah, of course. So this is something I've sort of been writing for a very long time. And and then I stopped because, after a point you can't become, repetitiveness is not good for any writer. So, see, the first step towards solving a problem is recognizing that it exists. And, the fact that the Narendra Modi government till date has not recognized that demonetization was a disaster. And we're still paying for the, the cost of demonetization. So, let's forget demonetization. Okay. As a government, if you've done something and it hasn't worked out, you cannot really come out and say, that was a mistake. Points well taken. But at the same time, you need to recognize that there is a marked slowdown. The economy is in trouble, and you need to sort of take steps towards, setting that right. And the good part was that this was the first budget of a 5-year term. the opposition more or less is not there. In fact, one point that I was telling someone the other day was that if you heard the budget speech this time, it was the quietest budget speech that at least I have seen, from whatever I have seen. Normally, when a finance minister is speaking, you will have a cat call, some MP shouting somewhere, and in between they'll get noisy. But this time there was just no noise. I mean, the minister stood up and she spoke for 2 hour 5 minutes, 2 hour 10 minutes, and she wasn't stopped at any point of time.
Some would argue that this shows how deeply Indian culture respects women.
No, I don't buy that. So, Indian culture doesn't respect women, so...
Well said. I will visit you in Arthur Road jail. And you also wrote a piece on income taxes, right? Obviously, one of the taxes they've put is they've raised the maximum income tax on, people earning more than 2 crores, 5 crores, blah, blah. It's all gone up. You, in fact, cited, Indira Gandhi in your piece as, the max rate in her time was 97%. And
there's this great story, and I wanted to put that into the piece, but it sort of became too lengthy. So this is from the actor Pran's official biography.
Okay.
And the biography is called And Pran because, it's obvious all the movies which he used to star in, his name used to be in the end. No?
And Pran. It's a very good name.
Yeah, as far as biographies go, it's a fantastic name. And it's been written by this gentleman called Bunny Rubin, who used to be one of the...
he was a big PR guy, wasn't he?
Original PR guys in Bollywood. In the Hindi film industry, not Bollywood, sorry. So one of the stories in the book is about how Raj Kapoor was almost broke after making Mehra Naam Joker. Okay. And he had to sell a part of his studio. And so then he decided to make this movie called Bobby for the new generation. And so Bobby was supposed to be this low budget quickie, as they call it in Hindi film parlance. So obviously Pran was there in the movie, and knowing that, this guy is going through a tough time, he did not charge for the movie. Or so the biography says. And so anyway, the movie sort of was released and it became a huge hit. So apparently after the movie became a huge hit, Raj Kapoor paid Pran 1 lakh rupees. And Pran was like, iska kya fayda? 97,000 to tax mein hi jana hai. So the marginal rate of tax in the early 70s was 97.75%. Okay. And I think it was in the budget of 1974-75, where Yashwant Rao Chauhan, who was then the finance minister, said that something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the high tax rate is essentially leading to, a situation where the black economy is getting bigger. So given that, we are reducing the tax rate. So the tax rate was reduced from 97.75% to 75%.
Dhanya ho gaye hum.
So anyway, so the point is that India has such a huge black economy, primarily because over the years, we've wanted to tax the high income earners at high tax rates. And the argument is the old one that of social equity, where people who earn more should be paying more taxes because they are, blah, blah, blah. Now, all this makes immense sense or it doesn't make sense. That is a different argument for a different day.
It's the seen, it's not the unseen. The unseen of high tax rates would really be two things. One is that wherever people who are earning that much are able to leave, they leave. So, for example, Singapore has low tax rates. If you're in India and you're earning 5 crores a year, you'll just go somewhere where the tax is lower. So it's a flight of labor and it's a brain drain, as it were. And the other effect is that you have a larger black market. And the point is, anyone who can do jugaad to save taxes. Saving taxes was practically a core skill back in the 70s and 80s. And anyone who can do the jugaad to save the taxes, which will be the Ambanis and the Adanis, will do so. And it's unfortunate few.
No. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. But what I wanted to say was that all this makes sense in a country where a significant number of rich people are actually paying taxes. Okay. Now, if you look at the Indian economy, and there are numbers for this, it's not like, this is true for assessment years 2017-18, which is financial year 16-17. There were 81,344 people who had a gross total income of more than 1 crore. gross, not even taxable. Okay, 81,344 in a country of 130 crore.
And I'd like to assure our listeners that neither Vivek nor I were part of this.
I mean, I wish. So, nowhere near so. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing this podcast. So. I would have been, relaxing somewhere. Anyway, so the point is 81,344 people have declare a gross income of more than a crore. Of this, around 51% are the salaried. Poor guys don't have any option. They have to pay tax, right? So in the budget, people who earn between 2 crore and 5 crore now have to pay tax at the rate of, the highest marginal rate is 39%. And above 5 crore, the rate is 42.74%. Okay. Now the point is, and we are talking about 81,344 people above a crore. So not even so the 2 crore number will probably be 1/4 or whatever. I mean, it will probably be 30,000 or something like that, right? Not even that. It will be lower than that. So where are the numbers? You should first look at expanding the tax base rather than, trying to tax the shit out of people who are already there.
And like you pointed out, maybe in the extreme short term, in the next financial year, you might increase the taxes coming in from here, but in the long run,
but overall, it will not. I mean, anyone. See, it's also a matter of effort, right? I mean, when you see that any extra effort leading to any extra income, a bulk of it, if it goes to the government, I mean, why would you want to put in that effort, right? So that part is always true. So I mean, so the thing is, in a country like India, where most people or a large population is still not paying taxes should remain moderate. I think the 30% top tax rate, which we've been following since 97, 98 is perfectly fine. And this just discourages, people from declaring income. Also, see, what also happens is that, people who earn a lot of money, like, the 2 crores and the 5 crores of the world, they don't necessarily make this money through salaried income, right? I mean, a lot of this money is earned through dividend. Tax rates there are lower. A lot of this money is made through capital gains. Tax rates there are lower. So, I mean, ultimately, you are ending up hitting the salaried guy who has no choice. I mean,
and the other point I keep making is that, we need a government to protect our rights, so we need some taxes, and that's fair enough. But if you actually think about it, taxation amounts to part-time slavery. For example, what does it mean if you pay 40% of your income every year in tax? It means that for 40% of the year, you are basically working for the government. So from January to April or May or whatever it is, you are working for the government. You start earning after that, which is a situation which, you don't mind doing some slavery for the government. It's basically part-time slavery, as long as you're seeing that the state is doing what it's supposed to do. But there is no rule of law. There is no infrastructure. All the things that the state is supposed to do, it doesn't do. And on top of that, there is this bullshit of having the taxes.
Did you see that video of the scooter going into an open storm drain?
There you go. You work from Jan to April as a slave for the government, and then your scooter goes into a storm drain, and you think, "Damn it, I'm not coming out."
No, they were able to pull it out. So,
but I mean,
there are 4 people who.
You get what I'm saying. Yeah. So we'll have to go in for a break now, and we'll continue after the break. But before that, the final postcard I received, which is for me. No, wait.
Okay.
Dear Amit, I was very pleased when I read on Twitter that Vivek Kaul was going to be on your show. I really enjoy the episodes you guys do together. You both have the rare skill of communicating complex ideas in simple language. When I read that Vivek was doing an episode with you, I immediately turned to my other friend called Amit and told him, "Achhe din aane wale hai." This letter is from Narendra M. in Delhi. We'll come back after a quick commercial break, hopefully.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Do remember that if you enjoy what you're listening to, take a screenshot, tag us on social media, and we'll repost you on one of the platforms. Also, just, shout out if you want to tell us anything about what's going on. Also, a quick reminder, we are still hiring. We're hiring in a whole bunch of different areas. If you're looking to work at what I believe is the best place on earth to work at, then you should check out our careers page. That's at IVMPodcast.com. ivmpodcast.com/careers. On Cyrus Says, journalist and news editor Maruk Inayat talks to Cyrus about the diminishing opposition in the parliament, her journey from growing up in Kashmir to studying at Harvard, her experience reporting 2611, and her podcast, The Note with Maruk Inayat. That's on the IVM Podcast Network. On paperback, Racheta and Satyajit are joined by film critic Sucharita Tyagi, who discusses the role that film reviews play and the books adapted into films. On Keeping It Queer, Naveen and Farah talk to the queer affirmative therapists from the Sahas Therapy Group, Advaita and Jagruti, about mental health in queer spaces. On the Pragati podcast, Pawan is joined by Takshashila fellow Amaya Nayak to talk about the United Nations and its role in global governance. On States of Anarchy, Hamsani's guest is author Manu Pillai. They discuss communal relations and the intersection of the foreign and domestic in Indian history. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik is joined by strategy consultant Mohit Hira. They talk about the evolving brand-consumer relationship and how the concept of airy tales came into being. On IVM Likes, staffers Abbas Saishri and our newest producer Shlok are discussing the Indian version of The Office. I think you'll enjoy that. On the Habit Coach podcast, Ashlyn talks to one of the finest pastry chefs of India, Puja Dhingra, where they discuss various entrepreneurial habits. On Equity Sahiye, Shrey Lunkar, Senior VP, and Ashish Somaya, CEO at Motilal Oswal AMC, talk to Anupam about the company's investment philosophy, how do you identify stocks, and a whole lot more. And with that, let's continue on with your show.
Welcome back to The Seen and the Unseen. I'm chatting about the budget with Vivek Kaul, and we put out a request for an Ask Me Anything on Twitter, and we've been inundated with responses because Vivek Kaul, I have realized in the last 18 hours, is basically the Shah Rukh Khan of economics. Dude, what's your fan following?
Like you are the Govinda of podcasts, podcaster number one. Yeah, after hero number one, Kuli number one, BV number one,
मैं seriously बोल रहा हूँ, तू मेरा मजाक उड़ा रहा है. It's very
खिलाड़ी number one है Akshay actually.
खिलाड़ी number one है Akshay. I don't mind being the Akshay of. So let's just moving on to your questions. And one of the things that you promised your many fans, many fans, is that you will give autographed copies of your book out to whoever asks the interesting questions.
Most interesting, most interesting.
The most interesting questions, because all the questions are interesting and there are so many of them we couldn't possibly pick.
We'll go broke paying courier charges.
We'll go, yeah. So
given that, both of us don't come in the 43% tax bracket.
Yeah. So we have selected, or even lower tax brackets for that matter. You embarrass kar raha hai. We have so many questions. We won't, by the way, be asking all questions. It's not possible. Maybe someday we should just do a special episode or have a separate podcast where Vivek answers questions. A podcast called Ask Vivek, which would be quite interesting.
Yeah. Use your Vivek to ask Vivek.
Yeah, but we're kind of rambling now to get on to the winning question straight away. The winning question is by Somit Mishra, who tweets at The Crooked Skull, all one word. And the question is this. Quote, this question is not exactly on the budget but related to economic survey released a day earlier. The document talks a lot about creating a virtuous cycle of investment, savings and exports while completely undermining the domestic consumption part. How wise a strategy is it to actually envisage a 5 trillion economy on the back of exports, especially when A, there is an uncertain global market with anti-globalization mood across Europe and US, and B, the Indian manufacturing sector is yet to show us that it can compete with China. Stop quote.
Okay. So, I can see where the economic survey is coming from. And if you look at the history of economic growth, and if you look at the history of economic growth over the last 50, 60 years, countries which have gone from being developing countries to becoming developed countries have started with, low-end exports, things like toys and agriculture exports and leather exports and so on and so forth. I mean, and this is true across, be it China, be it Southeast Asia, be it Taiwan. Even when the US was a developing country and when they exported stuff to the United Kingdom of Great Britain, this is how all development starts. So to that extent, there is a formula for the entire thing, and the economic survey is obviously going with that formula, and you really cannot sort of blame them not to be going with it, because the global market clearly is much bigger than the Indian market. And you would rather have, some portion of the overall bigger pie, right? Now, to the question of why, Indian manufacturers competing globally, which is true. Our exports are not productive enough to be competing globally. And, we all know examples of how, the Lakshmi and Ganesh, who we worship during Diwali, they are also now made in China. We know the example of holy colors and pichkaris being made in China. So if, we're not able to make even this basic stuff at a good competitive price. The latest example that I've heard of, and which is very interesting, is that now we are importing agarbattis from Vietnam. And that's primarily because Vietnam grows a lot of bamboo. So obviously someone, some industrialist or some entrepreneur from Vietnam has come to India and studied the market, and that's how it's all started. The other thing is, if you look at our manufacturing firms, and this is something very peculiar to India, they either employ a bulk of them. They either employ less than 50 people or they employ more than 250 people. There is a huge gap in the middle, okay? And it's these middle firms who actually create jobs. So basically what seems to be happening is that once a firm reaches a certain size, let's say it employs around 40, 45, 47 people, it doesn't want to grow beyond that size. Because, the rules and the regulations that it has to follow once it sort of grows beyond 50 people are so humongous and so problematic that it doesn't make sense for it to go beyond that
in
size.
Some cases 20 people. So what typically happens, and you and I have been going on about this forever, is that where we went wrong in the last few decades is that, look, India's advantage, if you're looking back 30 years, 40 years, was cheap labor. We should have been the manufacturing superpower that China was. But the reason we couldn't do that was because our manufacturing units could never scale. We had bad labor laws, which this incentivized companies scaling beyond a certain point. With some laws, the number is 20. That the cost becomes so high if you go past 20 that what companies would do is, instead of using the advantages of scale, they would set up separate units, and there would be many units which have 20 people, and therefore not using economies of scale and not being able to scale up and grow to the middle level, and from there to the big level, to bigger levels. And this is sort of one of the key reforms that people have been talking about from donkey's years. This is labor law reforms are very, very essential to get the manufacturing sector growing. And this is something that, in fact, the Modi rhetoric in 2014 actually promised.
So I'll just interject here. So, one of the things that Nirmala Sitharaman talked about in the budget was the fact that they are trying to reduce the number of labor laws. So if you look at, India as a whole, the central government has around 44 labor laws, and nobody is really sure as to how many labor laws, state governments have. But Amit Mitra, who's now the Minister of Finance in the West Bengal government and used to be a big business lobbyist once upon a time, estimates that the number varies anywhere between 150 to 200. So now what the government has sort of said is that they'll try reducing these laws to basically 4 codes. Now, this is something that was tried even back in 2015, and the labor union sort of opposed it, and then that was the last we heard of it. Now, this proposal has been sort of revised, and let's see as to how it goes. Now, so getting back to what I was trying to say, one of the things that's happening globally is that China now is sort of moving up the export value chain. So it doesn't want to do low-end exports because the labor now there is expensive, and there is no point in China now doing low-end exports. So those exports, so this is something that has been identified. I mean, the Arvind Subramaniam wrote quite a lot about it. And so the idea was that because China is not doing this, a lot of this could move to India. But what is happening is that a lot of it is moving to Bangladesh and Vietnam. So we've sort of lost an opportunity there. In fact, if you look at India's low-end exports, our engineering exports have been growing, but our low-end exports, which actually, as I said, create jobs, stuff like leather manufacturing or agri exports and so on and so forth. They have not been growing, or they've been growing at a very, very low pace. Now, to say that we are not able to compete and we will not be able to compete is one thing. But what else do you do? I mean, see, consumption is fine, but how does consumption work at the end of the day? I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say there is an area on the outskirts of a city. A new factory comes and establishes itself there. No? Factory creates jobs. Housing societies come around the factory. There are shops which open up in and around the factory, grocery shops. You have, everything, from pan walas to cigarette walas to sabzi walas to... So this is how, consumption sort of spreads. Now, you have to have something at the heart of it which encourages that consumption. Okay. So, many years back, I sort of read this great example, and, I can't recall where, as to how a single IT job, a proper IT job in Bangalore, created 6 other jobs around it. Okay. And it's straightforward, because, you need buses to take these IT guys from office and drop them back. Then you need homes to house them. Then these guys have long working hours. So then you need cooks, you need maids, you need so on and so forth. A lot of them go to the US, make money in dollars, come back and spend that money in India. So ultimately, for consumption to happen, investment has to happen. Consumption cannot keep driving up on its own unless there is some investment happening somewhere. And if consumption keeps, going up on its own, then ultimately you will end up with a huge retail bubble. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, look at what has happened in the Western world. What has happened in the Western world is that per capita incomes have stagnated. Median incomes have been stagnating since the 70s. Now, obviously, for politicians, the easy way out was to offer loans at low interest rates and then keep the consumption going. So once, and all that sort of added together and came to the financial crisis of 2008. So consumption cannot happen on its own. When people say that India is a consumption-driven economy, I think it's a very stupid thing to say. No, and we shouldn't be proud of it. People make statements like 50% of our economy is services. It's not something to be proud of.
And in a sense, the 50% of our economy being services is actually a reflection of something that's deeply gone wrong. I'll go back to manufacturing for a bit just to sort of illustrate that it's not just about one sector, it's about the whole economy. For example, we know we are in the middle of an agricultural crisis. Now, one of the reasons for the crisis, and I've had various episodes on agriculture which will be linked from the show notes, but one of the both illustrations and reasons for it is that in India, more than 50% of the people depend on agriculture for a living, while in all developed countries, the number used to be around that much, but now it's much less. For example, in the US, I think it's about 4%. In Europe, it's in single figure percentages. We are more than 50%. Now, typically what would happen is that your agricultural productivity would go up and people would move out of agriculture into manufacturing. That's kind of what you would expect, especially in India where we have the advantage of cheap labor. Now, we have a number of laws which tie people to agriculture for various reasons, which again, you can check out in those episodes. And plus, at the same time, we have a bunch of laws which constrain manufacturing. So even if people were to be able to get out of agriculture, where are the jobs for them? Where are the manufacturing jobs? And it seems that we might, that boat might well have sailed, because with the rise of automation and AI, it's now hard to say that even with, even if these labor laws were to be reformed, would we ever be a manufacturing
superpower? That's the question that's there. But see, as chief economic advisor of a country, you really cannot say it's not possible, right?
Of course, I mean, he has to
be positive, right? Yeah. So you can't really blame him for saying what he does. I think, see, what has happened is, if you read the economic surveys of the last 10 years, I think all of them make immense sense. It's just that the politicians are not the ones reading it. I mean, you and I are. That doesn't help. So. Yeah. And so I just wanted to make another point on, this services being 50% of our economy business. And, some of the services, I mean, you look at how big teaching classes are. In Mumbai, we call them teaching classes, right? I mean, why should there be a business like that? I mean, I find it amazing that, students first go to school and college and then go to these classes to attend classes all over again. So what are the teachers doing in school and college?
So basically state failure leading to the market having to step in, but it's unproductive.
Look at how big, it's not so true anymore, but once upon a time, how big the inverter business used to be in, inverters are not services, but what I'm saying is that a lot of
state failure is having to be covered up by the market, which is a waste of resources and a waste of energy and entrepreneurship, but you're just having to do it because the state, after taking our taxes and making us work free from Jan to April, is failing us.
So I think so. I don't know if I've answered the question because we sort of went round and round. But what I'm basically trying to say is that unless there is investment in the economy, how will consumption ever happen beyond a point? Because if consumption is happening and it's growing without investment, then it's only because the banks and the financial institutions are lending money, and they're lending money to anyone and everyone
and
without really checking.
Yes. Yeah. Next question, something more cheerful. This is from Sandeepan Mitra on Twitter, who asks, what will be the most appropriate Hindi song to describe the budget? And I insist you sing it.
No, I can't sing it.
Say it.
Yeah, so this is something, this is not my original thought. I saw it on Twitter. A journalist, a Hindustan Time journalist called Roshan. And he said, there's this movie called Papa Kehte Hain, which starred Jugal Hansraj and someone called Mayuri Kango. And the song was Ye jo thode se hain paise, kharch inko karu main kaise. So, which is primarily the, something that Miss Sita Raman was battling with this time around.
And doubly poignant given where the careers of Jugal Hansraj and Mayuri Kango went.
So, in fact, the story, there's this huge story about Jugal Hansraj. The Kuch Kuch Hota Hai song was basically his tune.
Oh.
Yeah. He gave it to Aditya Chopra, who gave it to Karan Johar. It was his tune. He also made this animated movie called Roadside Romeo, which was very good. The problem was it was marketed for kids. It's just that the humor was for adults. So that sort of went.
Clearly, you enjoyed the
wrong.
film.
Yeah, it was quite nice. So
we shall now go on to our next question. And apologies if I pronounce the name wrong. Shreyas Banthalpad. And this question is: NDTV is reporting a whole of 1.7 lakh crores in budget. Is this real? Sounds pretty insane.
Okay.
PS, the crores autocorrected to cries. So a whole of 1.7 lakh cries would also be interesting. But as he points out, it's an appropriate metaphor for where we are economy-wise.
Okay, so this is it's a complicated thing to sort of.
You have a tweet thread on it, which I will link from the show notes.
No, that's okay. I'll try explaining it. And I also have a piece in the Mint on Thursday, July 11th.
We are recording this on July 10th.
Right. So basically, again, where does this whole come from? There is something in the government budget. There is something known as revenue receipts. Okay. Now, what are revenue receipts? Revenue receipts are essentially taxes that the government earns. You subtract the state government's share from that, and to that you add the non-tax revenue of the government, which is basically the dividend that the public sector enterprises give, the dividend that financial institutions, the dividend that RBI gives to the government. So basically, you start with the taxes, the five major taxes, and then there are these small taxes also. So these five major taxes, from that you deduct the money that goes to the state governments, and to that you add the non-tax revenue of the government. So these are revenue receipts, to be very, very simple. Now, if you look at the economic survey of the government, it puts the revenue receipts at 15.6 lakh crore. Okay. If you look at the budget, it puts the revenue receipts at 17.3 lakh crore. So the question is, where did the 1.7 lakh crore difference go? Where did that money disappear? This is how people have been spinning it on Twitter. The money did not disappear. It's just that the economic survey and the budget use different estimates of the revenue receipts. So basically what happens is, when the budget is presented for a year, the government makes estimates of the amount of money it expects to earn and the amount of money it expects to spend. So these estimates are known as budget estimates. Okay. When the next budget is presented, the government again gives a record of the amount of money it expects to earn and the amount of money it expects to spend. So these are revised estimates. Okay. So like, let's say 2000, let's take an example of a financial year and do it. So 2018-19, in February 2018, Arun Jaitley presented the budget, and he presented the budget for 18-19, which is the period between April 2018 and March 2019. Okay. So what the numbers there were referred to as budget estimates. In February 2019, Piyush Goyal presented the interim budget. Okay. Now the numbers now for 2018-19 that he has are different from the numbers that Jaitley presented, right? So these numbers are known as revised estimates. Okay. So the revised estimate in the February 2019 interim budget for revenue receipts was 17.3 lakh crore. Okay. These are revised estimates. Now what happens, what is peculiar to this year is that we have an interim budget and then we have a final budget. We have an interim budget because the government is completing 5 years in office and it cannot offer a full year's budget because that is the next government's prerogative. On July 5th, Nirmala Sitharaman presents the final budget. Now what has happened is that meanwhile, there is this agency of the government called the Controller General of Accounts, which puts out a month-on-month record of how much the government earns and how much the government spends. So on May 31st, 2019, it put out the numbers for 2018-19. And as per that agency, the revenue receipts of the government for 2018-19 were 15.6 lakh crore. Okay. The economic survey used this estimate put out by the Controller General of Accounts. This is known as a provisional estimate. Okay. So if you're still not, if you're not confused by now, so the economic survey put out the Controller General of Accounts number, which was 15.6 lakh crore. Nirmala Sitharaman's budget stuck to the revised estimate of 17.3 lakh crore. So now the Controller General of Accounts number, given that it was published in May, is more accurate than the number which was the revised estimate published in the interim budget. Sitharaman used the revised estimate of 17.3 lakh crore and Subramaniam used the provisional estimate, which is 15.6 lakh crore, and hence the difference of 1.7 lakh crore. Now, what is happening here? Now, if you look at the previous few times when an interim budget was presented, the last one was in 2014 and the one before that was in 2009. So to rest all conspiracy theories, to put all conspiracy theories to rest, typically when a full budget is presented after an interim budget, the government uses a revised estimate and not a full estimate, not a provisional estimate. Now what happened was that this time around, the difference between the revised estimate and the provisional estimate was huge. The difference was 1.7 lakh crore. Whereas if you look at, I looked at the previous two times, and the difference between those two estimates was not very big. So because the difference was 1.7 lakh crore, which is why people sort of noticed it. Okay. Now what does this do in the overall scheme of things is very interesting. The revised revenue estimate is 17.3 lakh crore. The next year's revenue receipts are expected to be around 19.6 lakh crore or something like that. So that is a jump of 13%, which is doable. But then this 17.3 lakh crore is not the real number. It's just the number that the government has put into the budget, because that's that's convention that we follow. So if you put in the real number of 15.63 lakh crore, the revenue receipts now need to jump by 25.6% or something like that.
My God.
So which is where the problem is, and which is where, if we sort of go back to the RBI point, which is why the government expects the RBI to give a huge dividend. So because you're not accounting for things properly, and this is not, I mean, the Modi government is not to be blamed for this. They are just following what has always been done, but this is something that needs to be corrected, because you can't have revenue receipts, you want to earn 25% more, but you're reporting only 13% more. So this is a major hole in the way the budget is sort of crafted. It's just that it never mattered before this, so probably people didn't bother. So this time around,
it's a large number, and people on
but
Twitter
there is no conspiracy theory, so to say.
No one's taken this money out in suitcases.
It's not like someone's run off with the money. It's just that the accounting.
How many suitcases would you need to put 1.7 lakh?
I have no idea. You would have to ask Harshad Mehta. But he's long gone.
Yeah,
he was the suitcase man. These days, why do you want to do suitcase? You just do bitcoins, na? So.
That's also true, but if you took it in suitcases, it would give a boost to the suitcase industry. Our manufacturing problems could be solved.
No, so then I think the simplest way is to just do gold. And I mean, a simplest way would be to do diamonds, but diamonds, the problem is always a valuation. No one gives you the same valuation. Gold is gold. If it is gold, you'll get the rate for that day.
No more jokes from me in this episode. You're taking it too seriously. Let's move on to the next question from Sai Krishna Vadlamudi. And I like this question, which is it fair for central governments to collect cesses which they don't have to share with state governments? Doesn't it affect the federal nature of the country? It's a great question. You want to send him a book also?
Yeah. So basically what has happened is that, and this is, in the last 2-3 years, the government has sort of been imposing more and more cesses. Now, what is the difference between a cess and a tax? Okay. A tax is basically something let's say there is 20% income tax, and then there is a 10% cess on that tax. So which basically translates into a 2% tax. Okay. Now what happens is when the union government collects taxes, the taxes need to be shared with the state governments. Whereas when it collects a cess, it doesn't have to share that with the state government. It can keep it for itself. Which is why what has been happening is in the last few years is that there has been an increase in the number of cesses. I mean, if you look at, this year also there was some cess which has been introduced on petrol, 1 rupee per litre. What this essentially does is that every time a new cess is introduced, money goes directly into the coffers of the central government. It's not shared with the state government. Now, this I think is wrong primarily because, ultimately the taxes are basically coming from the states, right? I mean, it might be an income tax, but there's nothing like a central area. I mean, right? I mean, there are various states where people earn and then they pay taxes. So any tax or cess sort of thing should be shared. So I just did some rough calculation, and I think the proportion of cess in the government has increased from some 15-16% to close to 30%. So yes, I mean, so this goes against the entire spirit of fiscal federalism and so on and so forth. And so there's another point I wanted to make here is that there are a lot of these arguments which happen on how the South pays more tax, or people in Mumbai love to say this: we pay maximum income tax. We shouldn't be saying these things primarily because Mumbai pays maximum income tax because the companies are headquartered in Mumbai. The money that they are earning is spread all across India. Right, so you cannot really say that Mumbai is paying that's just an accounting entry, or for that matter that Delhi pays the second most tax, or for that matter that Bangalore, Karnataka pays a lot of income tax. No, Karnataka pays a lot of income tax because the IT companies happen to be based there and not, which is also a lot of it is a luck of a draw. It's not like there was infrastructure in Bangalore waiting for IT companies
I'll also point out the irony here that when Modi ji was a chief minister, he would talk a lot of federalism. Like 2014, there was a talk of the town that we'll have increased federalism and blah, blah, blah. But now that the incentives have changed and he's running the central government, where is it in practice?
No, it's not. And in fact, very interestingly, the 15th Finance Commission, which is currently on, is, if you look some of the things that it's working on, I mean, it goes against the entire idea of federalism. So And, I mean, ultimately, what is the point of a single nation, right? I mean, if the taxes are also not shared.
Yeah, it's
bizarre, right?
It's completely bizarre. Moving on now to a question from Umesh Gopinath. And I thought he was being humorous, so therefore I said that I will push for, I will recommend that he get the prize, but he hasn't got the prize, so I'm sorry because, but it's a question worth asking, and I presume he's joking. And the question is, what if there is a bigger story that we are not seeing now? What if it was all planned by Modi ji plus Shah ji, that the first 5 years will be spent to just crush the opposition, and the next 5 years are when the real Vikas is going to happen without worrying about winning elections.
I hope that happens. I sincerely hope that happens.
I think if I may answer this, I think that Umesh, you are overestimating the abilities and intelligence of these guys, that you think that they can have grand plans in 2014. Ki next 5 years we will do no reforms, no governance, we will crush the opposition, and then we will actually do some real work. That doesn't quite fit into Occam's razor of take the simplest explanation, which is incompetence. You wanted to point out a question by...
Yes, so there's this question by Ranju Sarkar, and I think you are better placed to answer this. He says, why is this government always in an election mode? Is the budget meant to be a political statement? Despite a clear mandate, why is Narendra Modi reluctant to undertake big bang reforms?
Okay, so brief answer to this would be that what public choice theory would point out is that, look, the basic truth of economics is that human beings respond to incentives. Public choice economics tells you that that is also true of people in government. What are the incentives of a politician? It is to come to power. Once he has gotten to power, what are his incentives? It is to remain in power and to use the power to generate money and to use that money to generate more power. It's an interplay between money and power. And therefore, if a government is not in constant election mode, it would be a little bit surprising. Now, what is the failure of our democracy and what we are not being able to handle is that ideally you would imagine in theory how a government performs when it comes to governance will determine how it does in politics in terms of getting re-elected. You provide good governance, you get re-elected. You provide bad governance, you don't get re-elected. That's how democracies are supposed to work. I'm not sure that that is quite happening in India, because a lot of the governance our politics is driven today by these grander narratives, and I won't go into the merits of those grander narratives, but there are grander narratives which involve identities, which, might involve a Hindu Rashtra, which again, I won't make a value judgment on that, but the point of the matter is that whether you carry out labor reforms or whether you keep the RBI autonomous is not an issue that is going to win you any votes, which goes to the second part of the question, that why hasn't Modi carried out big bang reforms? Because there are no votes in it. There are, I did an episode with Puja Mehra on an excellent book she wrote, where she spoke about the political economy of the last 5 years, and her take was that when the Modi government came to power in 2014, they experimented a bit with some reforms. They did the bankruptcy law, and they were looking at doing some small things, but then they quickly realized, as they lost a string of state elections, that there is no political equity in that it doesn't affect the politics at all. And they quickly moved to populism. Like Puja's theory about demonetization was one of the reasons Modi thought of it, and one of the reasons it worked was that regardless of whether it was a good policy or a bad policy in practice, it was viewed by the people as hurting the rich, and that always sells. Whether in reality it does that or not is a different matter. I'd say it hurt the poor more. But the narrative sold, and they won the UP elections after that, and they just won the last general elections. So the government's focus is just on building narratives that sell. In fact, even these income taxes which you spoke of, raising the high, you've pointed out, and it's perfectly logical, that the base of people who pay those taxes is so low, it doesn't make a difference.
But a lot of people love it.
A lot of people love it because the narrative is, we are punishing the rich and
the rich. Yeah. I mean, so that also, again, if it's again, this is slightly convoluted, and so this, because we used to have high taxes, okay, we had a huge black economy. And because we had a huge black economy, the normal guy did not go around to respect the rich or the process of wealth creation. And that is again, it's coming back to hurt us in this way. So, yeah, I mean, that's the full circle basically.
That's how it is. Politics and economics are sort of divorced. Good economics doesn't make for good politics and vice versa. So what do we do? Another question from Sanjay Fuloria, who's a friend of yours.
Yeah, Sanjay and me, we're both doing our PhDs together. He completed it.
You did not.
No, I did not.
And therefore you have landed up here.
Yeah, I did not, because, I mean, the guide wanted me to sort of put some mathematics into the research proposal, which I was not ready for.
So Sanjay's question is, will nudge theory work in the Indian context?
You are the better person to answer this. You are the behavioral economics boss. So.
Well, not really. It was like, as Gurunath Mayappan said in the context of the Chennai Super Kings, where he said, I'm just an enthusiast. I would say in this context, I'm just an enthusiast. And I would say, look, the Indian state does so many things by such hardcore coercion that ye nudge ka kya sawal hai? Nudging is something that I think, product designers can use better, user interface designers can use better. But when it comes to the state, our Indian state just believes in hard coercion and not soft nudges. So, matlab ye bolne wali cheez hai. I mean, I think it's in the economic survey that our chief economic advisor used the term. And yeah, I mean, it's nice in theory and all, but, I really don't see the relevance of it.
Talking about nudges, one of the areas where nudges get extensively used in Europe is what happens to the human body after death. Okay. So in a lot of countries, you have the opt-in option, wherein if you want your body to be donated, after you die, and for things to happen, whatever happens, then you have to opt in for it. And in the countries which have this opt-in thing, the number of donations is very low. Then there are countries where there is the opt-out option.
The default is
the default is that your body will be will be donated for research or whatever. I mean, or your organs might be used on other people who need them. So in that case, the rates are high because the option is to opt out, and most people being as lazy as they are,
especially if they're already dead,
they don't opt out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's sort of macabre, but yeah, that's why the nudge theory is used quite a lot.
I mean, the nudge. I think the phrase itself in this context of economics came from Cass Sunstein, and it's interesting. So last year, Cass Sunstein wrote this book called On Liberty, same title as the John Stuart Mill book. So instantly, I ordered the book, and it comes, and I'm expecting it to be about liberty. But the book should really have been called On Choice Architecture because it's only about nudging. Then I bought another book recently by him, which is, again, it has some completely unrelated title, but it's only about nudging and choice architecture. This is the one on
the government. He writes 2 books every year. Yeah?
He writes 2 books every year. They all have different titles. It makes it appear as if they're all about different things. They're all about nudging, which is, I mean, credit to the guy.
Same cheese Manmohan Desai jaisa.
Yeah, kind of your idol in a sense. I mean, how many budgets have you written about? It's like...
No, but that is experience.
You are the Cass Sunstein of budgets.
That's experience, na, Amit, there. What is experience other than having, doing the same thing
That's true.
over and over again smartly?
That's true. Yeah, I'm expecting him to write a travelogue, like my trip through South Africa or something, and then it will all be about nudging. But moving on from poor Mr. Sunstein, one question that a lot of people asked you, so I won't even take any specific names here, is the whole 5 trillion economy thing. What's the deal? I mean, it's an impressive number. Is that why it's there, part of optics? Ya kuch hai isme? Funda kya hai?
So, see, the thing is, India is a $2.7 trillion, $2.8 trillion economy right now. And by 2024-25. So, so here's the thing. So first they said 2024, okay, which basically meant 5 years. But then now they are saying 2024-25, which basically means 6 years. So we have to go from 2.8 trillion to 5 trillion. One thing is, we are sort of setting a target in a currency which is not our own. Okay, so the currency, it's the American dollar. Now there are multiple things here. So we have to go from 2.8 trillion to 5 trillion. Okay. Now it's not just our economic growth. What will also matter at the end of the day is the conversion rate between the rupee and the dollar, right? So the government basically expects that if the economy grows at around 8% in real terms, and then there is 4% inflation, so which basically means we grow in 12% nominal terms. So from 2.8, we'll reach 5 trillion. But at the same time, the $1, which is roughly worth around 70 rupees now, will be worth 75 rupees by then. So, the basic problem with this argument is that nobody really knows where the foreign exchange market is headed. The only thing that we can say for sure is that over a longish period of time, the rupee will depreciate against the dollar simply because our rate of inflation is higher than the American rate of inflation. So that purchasing power will get adjusted. So beyond that, there is nothing. It's just it's a good, in strategy terms, it's called a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. So
why do they call it hairy?
I have no idea. So, see, this is the problem. I spent 2 years doing an MBA. So I remember these big things. But if you ask me to get into the nitty-gritty, I have no idea. I mean, that's a period of my life which I have completely eradicated from my memories.
I had long hair once, and I suspect at that time all the girls who had crushes on me had big, hairy, audacious goals.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Bad joke, huh?
Yeah, dad joke.
so it's a BHAG in that sense. That, so I can get where it's coming from. I mean, if you want to do X, you obviously have to aim a little higher. So, but then, for us to get around to achieve that, there are so many things that sort of need to be set right. So, yeah, it's not going to just happen, you've given it this target and now it will sort of automatically happen on its own. It's not. I mean,
it almost sounds like it's not the team of economists which is deciding a target. It's a team of PR people saying what number sounds good and okay, 5 trillion. And then when you don't get there, you revise the estimates.
So currently we are a 188, 189 lakh crore economy, right? So let's say if we were to sort of talk about it in rupee terms, the number to put out would probably be 400 lakh crore. But a 400 lakh crore just doesn't sound as interesting or as catchy as 5 trillion. So see, anyway, people have a problem in understanding how big a big number is, right? So that's the basic thing, right? So, and if you take that into account and take into account the fact that a trillion sounds so much more bigger than a lakh crore, there you have it. So.
Yeah, and even if we don't get there, A, we can revise the estimates, and B, we can just point out that, hey, Nehru didn't take us to 5 trillion either.
And, and the funny thing is the way we are going, if for all we know that if there is a sort of a crisis in the US, the dollar might very well depreciate against the rupee. Who knows? Yes. So if the rupee appreciates, it will get easier for us to get to the 5 trillion number. I mean, it will then just a part of it will just be an accounting entry. So
there you go. Fascinating. I have taken up a lot of your time today, so we'll kind of bring things gradually to an end with a final question by, and apologies to all the people whose questions we haven't taken. I didn't necessarily choose these. With a final question by Prashant Dubey, who asks, do you have any recommendations to read more about the Austrian school, by which he basically means economics? And both of us replied to him on Twitter. So would you like to recommend?
Sure, for a general audience. I think one book that I sort of keep going back to and which I've learned quite a lot from was Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. And the best part is you don't even have to buy it. It's freely, legally available on the internet. I mean, you don't have to everything is available on the internet, but not necessarily legally. So.
And the interesting thing about Henry Hazlitt's Economics is One Lesson is based on an essay by Frederick Bastiat called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen. And Bastiat, of course, is one of my heroes. And
Broken Window Fallacy.
And this show is named after that essay. So basically, the seen and the unseen and Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson kind of.
So actually, one can read a lot of Bastiat also. And a lot of Bastiat books are actually available for... Bastiat actually didn't write books as much as he wrote essays.
Long essays.
So all these long essays are available on the internet. It's just that, because it's a translation from French and because it's 200, 250 years old, the Hazlitt book works a little better. But after having read the Hazlitt book, I think it's a great idea to read Bastiat.
In fact,
not the other way
Bastiat,
around.
I'd say Bastiat has a book called The Law. So look that up. That is an absolute...
It's available in Kindle and it's free. So.
That's a masterpiece. And what I would also recommend is Thomas Sowell has a great book called Basic Economics, which is a wonderful book. He also wrote a book after that called Applied Economics. But basically, I mean, both of us are fans of Sowell. And everything.
In fact, there is this great Sowell book called Wealth, Poverty and Politics that people should... But you should read that after you've read Basic Economics.
Basic Economics. And also, if you're looking for modern day textbooks, there are textbooks by Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabarrok of Marginal Revolution, who have both been on this podcast, by the way. But that's not why I'm recommending these books. I was their fan before they came on the podcast. That's kind of why I invited them. So the causation works the other way. So they've written textbooks on macroeconomics and microeconomics. Check that out. And a great online source is the Marginal Revolution University, which has dozens of videos on simple economic concepts and is really, really good.
In fact, there's one book that I sort of, I learned quite a lot from. It was called very, very boringly, Principles of Macroeconomics. And there's only one edition that ever got written. It was a 1979 edition. It was written by Dr. C. Rangarajan and Bakul Dholakia. And Dr. Rangarajan at that point of time, I think, used to teach at IIM Ahmedabad. And I used to have that book and I read it once and I lost it. And I've never been able to find a copy again. And it was just a brilliant book. I mean, if you want to, understand economics, macroeconomics, in the conventional way with a little bit of maths, not maths which would sort of break your head, but simple, addition, subtraction, division. It's a great book if you can find a copy of it anywhere. I mean, I haven't been able to find a copy over the years, but it was just...
If any reader can, and if any reader finds it, please tag Vivek on Twitter. He will pay a fortune for it.
Yeah.
A fortune in relative terms, given what we earn.
From the 5 trillion, whatever we are earning from that 5 trillion.
A certain amount of that will join the GDP. Speaking of books, so the actual last question I'll ask is something that, again, a listener wanted to know. What book are you writing right now? Tell us.
Okay, so I'm writing this book called... so let me give you a little bit of background before I tell you what the book's... So basically, I have an editor called Sachin. So Sachin approached me with an idea on writing a book on the non-performing assets of Indian banks. Okay?
Which we have done episodes on.
And I was like, yaar, ye kaun, matlab, I just thought it's just too technical. And also my last book, with the benefit of hindsight, I can say that it turned out to be a slightly more technical, and obviously it was very thick than I would have ideally wanted it to be. So I was like a little apprehensive about, whether I should, write it or not. Then, I had a brainwave one day on what the title and the cover of the book should be. So the title I thought of was Bad Money. And I sort of thought that, it should sort of be, written in blood against black background, something like that. Or maybe, you have the rupee symbol disintegrating. And so once I had the title, I sort of became very excited about writing the book, because, Bad Money was it's just a
the
great
cover
title.
You describe would be perfect for crime fiction, and I of course keep telling you should write
Bad
some
Money
crime
is
fiction.
again, so this book is basically about the bad loans, the NPAs that public sector banks primarily have accumulated over the last decade. But it's not just about that. It's also a lot about India's banking history and how things have sort of gone wrong. And there's a lot of basic economics in it as well. I mean, like one lesson which I keep going back to over and over again is that there is no free lunch in economics. And it comes out beautifully in a lot of situations in this book. I mean, some things sometimes when you're writing and you realize, arey, yahan pe bhi hai. So yeah. So that's the book, and I'm just about, probably I'll finish the first draft sometime next week. So it's still some time away from publishing, probably early next year, end of this year. So it also depends on how fast the publishers move, and it also depends on whether they like it or not.
How can they not like it? And besides, I think you've reached the level, I mean, Shah Rukh Khan of economics and all that. It doesn't matter.
Coming from, you put Govinda of podcasting, so.
यार तू मुझे मरवाएगा. मैं seriously praise दे रहा हूँ and you're like.
तो मैं कौन सा मजाक कर रहा हूँ यार? I mean, I'm also serious here, so. You should keep all this Hindi stuff, huh?
Yeah. That was Vivek speaking to our producer Abbas, who will keep all the Hindi stuff. And meanwhile, Vivek, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to Amazon or your nearest bookstore and find Vivek's books, India's Big Government and the Easy Money Trilogy. You can follow Vivek on Twitter at call_Vivek. You can follow me at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Scene and the Unseen at sceneunseen.in, thinkpragati.com and ivmpodcast.com. The Scene and the Unseen is supported by the Taxation Institution, an independent center for research and education in public policy. Taxation offers 12-week courses in public policy, technology policy, and strategic studies for both full-time students and working professionals. Visit takshashila.org.in for more details. Thank you for listening.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the Empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills. From health to relationships. From mental well-being to emotional well-being. And of course, your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the Empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, this is Shridaditya.
And I'm Amit Doshi.
And we host Shunya One.
It's a really fun podcast where we talk to some of the best entrepreneurs in the country.
Yes, talking about everything from their startup challenges to what they're building and all the future of technology right here.
So catch us on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you listen to your podcast from.